to buying the Wilfer site, now the only gigawatt site in Wales this year, and make sure it's progressed as soon as possible to meet our net zero and energy security needs and give the enormous boost to the Ynys Môn and North Wales economy.
Prime Minister.
As ever, my honourable friend is a fantastic champion for Wilfer and the nuclear industry. I can confirm to her that Wilfer is a candidate for the new nuclear site and one of a number of potential sites that could host civil nuclear projects. No decisions have been taken at present, but Great British Nuclear is working with the government to support access, and we're also developing a new national policy statement providing the planning framework for new nuclear power, and would very much welcome her and other contributions to that consultation.
Stuart Malcolm MacDonald.
Mr. Speaker, last year the Prime Minister and other senior ministers were given the conclusions of a government audit of research programmes at UK universities with links to the Chinese state. The audit flagged up hundreds of programmes of being at high risk of being used potentially by the CCP for military use and other applications in strategic and sensitive areas that are of high interest to an authoritarian regime such as China. A smaller proportion were judged to be extremely high risk. Despite that, the government has elected to do nothing about it. So will the Prime Minister confirm his personal knowledge of that report and explain to the House why no action is to be taken? These programmes have to be continued unimpeded.
Mr. Speaker, we will continue to take a robust and proactive approach towards our relationship with China, rooted in the UK's national interest and values. And in fact, our National Security Act, which we passed last year, brings together vital new measures to protect our national security, and that includes creating a foreign influence registration scheme through the Act, which has been created to tackle specifically covert influence in the UK, and will continue to take all possible powers to keep the country safe.
Two remarkably talented and enthusiastic individuals from Kettering, Becky Horrell and Lindsay Atkins, have put together a really ambitious £2 million bid to repurpose the redundant Gala Bingo Hall site in Kettering High Street into a community arts, music, business and family hub, which would be simply transformative for Kettering Town Centre. Would my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, please be kind enough to facilitate a meeting for us with the relevant culture and levelling up ministers so we can explore how a combined community ownership fund and cultural development fund bid might get us across the line?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for highlighting this exciting initiative, and also commend Becky and Lindsay for their campaigning. He'll know that our £150 million community ownership fund is there specifically to help safeguard small but much loved local assets, and indeed our cultural development fund, like the one he mentions, is there to support further cultural projects as well. I will ensure that he gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss these plans further, and wish him and his constituents all the best with this redevelopment project.
Janet Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Data revealed by the Centre for Cities showed that after 14 years of Tory rule, towns and cities in every corner of our country have been levelled down, left behind and left out of pocket. On average, people are over £10,000 a year worse off because his party has failed on growth. When will the Prime Minister take responsibility for breaking Britain?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in fact, what we're seeing is record investment in our towns across the UK, many of which were neglected by the Labour Party for decades, Mr. Speaker. But if we really care about levelling up, what we need to do is avoid saddling hard-working Britons with higher taxes, which is exactly what Labour's £28 billion green spending spree would do.
Speaker, for 27 years, constituents across the Vale of Glamorgan and across the whole of Wales sadly have to wait longer to see a doctor, longer for an ambulance, longer at A&E and longer for an operation than patients in England. There are 24,785 patients in Wales waiting longer than 2 years for an operation. That number in England is 227. Does my right honourable friend agree that Aneurin Bevan will be turning in his grave on the fact that you can't trust Labour with the NHS?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is absolutely right. Whereas here in England we have a plan when it comes to education, where we're marching up the league tables, and we have virtually eliminated those waiting the longest amount of time. But in Labour-run Wales, as he said, education rates are falling and waiting lists over 18 months are more than 10 times higher than here in England. It's crystal clear we should stick to our plan for a brighter future and not go back to square one with Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to Open Democracy this week, since 1999, at least 391 people have died at our borders. That is a rate, Prime Minister, of more than one man, one woman per month for 25 years. And on top of this, the financial cost of this deadly and failed border regime, as well as the Prime Minister's plan for Rwanda, is estimated to cost at least £800 million since 2014. So will the Prime Minister now show that he understands that the people whose lives he's making sick bets on are human beings and provide them with safe routes to the UK in order to seek asylum, instead of more failed and extreme forms of deterrence?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's in fact criminal gangs that are exploiting vulnerable people and leading many of them to lose their lives as they make these dangerous crossings. Now, on this side of the House, we think that's wrong and we want to do something about it, which is why we need to get a deterrent up and running and be able to send people to Rwanda. It's his party that opposes that, so the question for them is why do they remain on the side of the criminal people smugglers?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. February marks Emotional Health, Boost Your Self-Esteem and Children's Mental Health Month. In recent years, something like 6,500 people die in the UK each year due to suicide. And in 2021, I was nearly one of them. Luckily, my attempt failed. I was found by family members quickly. I received amazing care at St Helier and Springfield hospitals, didn't do any permanent damage, and was well looked after by the NHS in the months that followed. And I want to take this chance to say thank you to everyone who saved me, and sorry to my family and loved ones who I put through such an awful ordeal. In that moment, I felt alone and scared and like there was no way out, and that the world would be better off without me in it. But I don't recognise that man anymore. I know that nothing is ever really worth that. Help really is out there, and I'm pretty awesome. Does the Prime Minister agree that one death by suicide is one too many? And will he send a message from the dispatch box today that whatever you're going through, you are not alone, that help is out there, and better days lie ahead?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know the whole House will join me in commending my honourable friend for his bravery in sharing his story. And I can absolutely assure him that we take this issue incredibly seriously. The new suicide prevention strategy ensures that we will have the actions in place to reduce suicide over the next years, because we absolutely recognise the impact that it has on people, their families, and we should do everything we can to prevent that from happening.
Liz Truss.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And may I take the opportunity to ask the Prime Minister if he will consider apologising to Brianna Gray's mother for his insensitive comment. But turning to my question, the independent report into Teesworks, released last Monday, throws up more questions than it answers. And it's vital that we now have a National Audit Office investigation. The report was scathing and said there is insufficient transparency to offer evidence of value for money. Shouldn't the government lead by example, and will the Prime Minister finally release details of his conversations surrounding Teesworks, as he was asked to do twice last year?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Honourable Lady was talking about the report in Teesworks, as far as I can see, and what that report noted was that the pace and scope of the regeneration had a wide-reaching positive impact on the local economy, and of course it was an independent external report. It makes it clear that there's no evidence of corruption or illegality, and the government will of course respond to the recommendations in the report as soon as possible.
Alicia Cairns.
Speaker, can I give my heartfelt thanks to the Prime Minister for his support for our Melton, Harborough and Stamford villages following the recent devastating flooding. But tens of homes, farms and businesses in Rutland were also devastated, but our county is in effect excluded from ever receiving support in the future due to the arbitrary flaw that is currently put in place. Flood support should be based on the most affected or a percentage of population, but Rutland has to have 1,000th more flooding than next door Lincolnshire for us ever access support. So will my right honourable friend please give a meeting to me and the member for Swindon South to discuss this important issue?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, I extend my sympathies to all those impacted by the recent storms and flooding. We are investing record sums in flood defence across England, and the recovery support framework is in place for families and businesses in every area that have experienced exceptional flooding. I know that my honourable friend is in touch with DLEC ministers about how those schemes affect her constituency, but I'll ensure that she gets the correspondence and meetings that she needs to deliver for her local communities.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 weeks ago, I challenged the Prime Minister on his government's broken promise on building new hospitals by 2030, including in my own area. But now it seems that the government are downgrading existing hospitals too. Children and parents in Eastbourne will be forced to travel for miles if the proposed downgrade of the hospital's paediatric services goes ahead. Campaigners have asked the government to call in this disastrous plan. Will the Prime Minister agree?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, actually, we're investing record sums in improving hospital infrastructure across the country. In Eastbourne, in particular, spades are already in the ground to deliver an elective surgical hub, Mr. Speaker. And I know that there is local Liberal Democrat scaremongering about the future of services. But the local Conservative MP is doing a fantastic job engaging with her community and working with local health officials.
Jenstens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday it was my huge pleasure to host the Aerospace Defence and Security Industry Apprenticeships event in Parliament, welcoming 2 apprentices from Collins Aerospace in Wolverhampton. Would he join me in National Apprenticeships Week for celebrating the opportunities apprenticeships can provide in the defence industry and also in our armed forces, who are all in our top 10 apprenticeship providers?
My honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight the importance of our apprenticeship provision, which is providing young people with opportunities across the country, but particularly, as she says, in the defence and aerospace sector. And those plans are in stark contrast to those of the party opposite, who have caved into big business and are now proposing to halve the amount of apprenticeship funding and halve the number of apprenticeships.
Kenny McCaskill.
If Grangemouth refinery closes, Scotland will be the only major oil-producing nation without a refinery capacity. At a time of energy insecurity, is it not economic madness to allow a profitable plant to close? And is it not environmental madness to transship oil for refining and distribution across the growingly dangerous high seas? Given the billions that he has received from North Sea oil and the billions that he will continue to receive from North Sea oil, will he ensure that Scotland retains a refinery capacity for Scotland's oil?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the future of Grangemouth refinery is obviously a commercial decision for their owners, but I'm told that the site will remain operating as a refinery until at least May of 2025. And in the meantime, the UK and Scottish governments are working together to seek assurances from Grangemouth about how they are supporting employees. But we remain confident in our fuel supply. And in terms of energy security, which you mentioned, that's why this government is unambiguously backing the North Sea oil and gas sector, because that's how you support energy security in this country, attract investment and create jobs, particularly in Scotland.
Dame Caroline Dell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was very proud that it was a Conservative government that appointed the Patient Safety Commissioner, and proud that we commissioned the Hughes report into medical devices and medicines, which was published this morning. Will my right honourable friend also make me proud that we can address the points she has raised and bring forward a redress scheme in a timely manner?
Prime Minister.
I'm grateful to the Patient Safety Commissioner and her team for their work on this important issue, one which I know my honourable friend has spoken about in the past. Of course, our sympathies, first and foremost, remain with those affected by sodium valproate. We're focused on improving the system and how the system listens to patients, and it's right that the government carefully considers the report's recommendations. The Department for Health will be responding to the report in due course, and the Health Secretary will keep the House updated on a regular basis.
Sarah Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of my Tamworth constituents, like local mom Jessica, have contacted me about special educational needs and disability support. Jessica's son has waited years for an autism diagnosis and doesn't expect to have an education, health and care plan in place by the time that he goes to secondary school. Will the Prime Minister confirm that students that need an EHCP will get them so that they can thrive in school?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course we want to see every child thrive at school, which is why we've tripled the amount going into special educational needs for capital places and put more money in to support EHCP plans. I'm sorry to hear about the case you mentioned. I'll make sure that we continue to look at that in particular because, as she said, we want every child to thrive at school.
Shelbrooke.
Wishes to His Majesty the King and Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales. I know my right honourable friend, and building on the answer to my right honourable friend, is exceptionally pleased with the huge report that's come out today. And there's been a huge amount of work that's taken across this chamber from the Honourable Lady for Livingston, the Honourable Lady for Washington, and my right honourable friend for Southampton and Romsey. May I push the point, though, to my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, that tens of thousands of women and children have suffered immensely since the 1970s, and government after government has not done anything about this. I'm proud that this government has done something about it. So can I urge my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, in the strongest possible terms, to talk to our right honourable friend, the Chancellors, to make sure that at the budget we can really address the issues raised in the huge report.
Minister.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend and colleagues on all sides of the House for their campaigning over many years on this issue. As I said, it's right that we not only do we extend our sympathies to those affected, that we carefully consider the recommendations from the Commissioner's report, and I can assure him we will do that with all due haste, and I know that the Health Secretary will keep the House updated.
Final question, Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Why did the Prime Minister downgrade the role of Minister for Disabled People? What message does he think this sends to them? And will he commit to reconsider this move, ensure the role is a Minister of State? And if not, will he agree to meet with me and disabled people's organisations and explain his reasoning?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, actually, the Minister for Disabled People is going to do a fantastic job because she passionately cares about this issue, and this government has a record to be proud of, whether it's supporting many more of those with disabilities into work, ensuring they can live independently, or making sure that children with complex disabilities have access to more changing places across the country, because those, Mr. Speaker, are the values of this Conservative government. And Mr. Speaker, I could just say also to Brianna Gray's mum, who is here, as I've said earlier this week, what happened was an unspeakable and shocking tragedy, Mr. Speaker. And as I said earlier this week, in the face of that, for her mother to demonstrate the compassion and empathy that she did last weekend, I thought demonstrated the very best of humanity in the face of seeing the very worst of humanity, and she deserves all our admiration and praise for that.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. We now come to the statement I call the Secretary of State for Health, Victoria Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and with your permission, I would like to make a statement on our plan to recover and reform NHS dentistry. But first, on behalf of the entire House and my department, I would like to send our very best wishes to His Majesty the King. His decision to share his diagnosis will be welcomed by anyone whose life has been touched by cancer. And I know that we're all very much looking forward to seeing him make a speedy recovery and resume his public duties. Turning now to dentistry. Thanks to a once-in-a-generation pandemic between 2020 and 2022, 7 million patients across England did not come forward for appointments with NHS dentists. Since then, we have taken decisive action to recover services. We've made reforms to the dental contract so that practices are paid more fairly for caring for NHS patients with more complex needs. And we've made sure that dentists update the NHS website regularly so the public know that they're taking on new patients. This has delivered results. Over 1 million more people saw an NHS dentist last year than the year before. But we know that too many, particularly those living in rural or coastal communities, are still struggling to find appointments. This recovery plan will put this right by making NHS dental care faster, simpler and fairer for patients and staff. It is built on 3 key pillars, and I'll address each one in turn. First of all, we will help anyone who needs to see an NHS dentist to do so, wherever they live and whatever their background. To do this, we must incentivise dentists across the country to care for more NHS patients. And that is why I'm delighted to tell the House that for the coming year, we are offering dentists 2 new payments on top of their usual payments for care. That will be £15 for every check-up they perform on NHS patients who haven't been seen over the past 2 years, and £50 for every new NHS patient they treat who hasn't been seen over the same period. Because we know that patients who don't have a relationship with a dentist find it harder to get care. This is not a long-term ambition. Our new patient premium will be available from next month. Mr. Speaker, we're also increasing the minimum payment that dentists receive for delivering NHS treatments. This will support practices with the lowest unit of dental activity, or UDA, rates to provide more NHS care. But we know that in many of our rural, remote and isolated communities, dentists themselves are in short supply. And that is why, starting this year, up to 240 dentists will receive Golden Hello payments worth up to £20,000 when they commit themselves to working in one of these areas for at least 3 years. These dentists will give patients the care they need faster, it will make dental provision fairer, and it will tackle health inequalities. And Mr. Speaker, we're also delivering dentistry to our most remote regions without delay. This year, we will deploy dental vans to more isolated rural and coastal areas. Staffed by NHS dentists, they will offer checkups and simple treatments like fillings. This model has been a tried and tested success across many regions. For example, last year in Cornwall, a mobile van visited 5 harbours and treated more than 100 fishermen and their families. We will be rolling out up to 15 vans across Devon, Gloucestershire, Somerset, Norfolk, Suffolk, Lincolnshire, Cambridgeshire, Dorset, Cornwall, North Yorkshire and Northamptonshire. This move has been welcomed by Healthwatch, the Nuffield Trust and the College of General Dentistry. And we will let patients know when vans will be in their area so they can get the care they need faster. Mr. Speaker, these reforms will empower NHS dentists to treat more than 1 million people and deliver 2.5 million more appointments. Just as the CEO of National Voices, a group of major health and care charities, has said, this extra money should help thousands of people who have been unable to see a dentist in the last 2 years to get the care they need. And these reforms are just the beginning. This recovery plan will also drive forward reforms to make NHS dentistry sustainable for our children and our grandchildren. Which brings me to the second pillar, growing and upskilling our workforce for the long term. Our long-term workforce plan, the first in NHS history, gives us strong foundations on which to build. By 2031, training places for dentists will increase by 40%, 40%. And places for dental hygienists and therapists who can perform simple tasks such as fillings will also rise by 40%. More dentists and more dental therapists will mean more care for NHS patients. And I'm delighted to tell the House today that we are going further in 3 key ways. First of all, we will consult on a tie-in to NHS work for dentistry graduates. Because right now, too many are choosing to deliver private work over valuable NHS care. More than 35,000 dentists in England are registered with the General Dental Council, but last year almost a third worked exclusively in the private sector. Training these dentists is a significant investment for taxpayers, and they rightly expect it to result in the strongest possible NHS care. That's why this spring we will launch a consultation on a tie-in for graduate dentists and how this could deliver more NHS care and better value for taxpayers. Secondly, we will take full advantage of our dental professionals' skills. Today, even though they have the right training, without written direction from a dentist, dental therapists cannot do things such as administer antibiotics. This year, we will change this, making life simpler for dentists and making care faster for patients. As the President of the College of General Dentistry has said, the use of the full range of skills of all team members will enable the delivery of more care and make NHS dentistry more attractive to dental professionals. Thirdly, we will recruit more international dentists to the NHS. We have a plan to do this by working with the General Dental Council to get more international dentists taking exams, to get them onto the register sooner, and to explore the creation of a new provisional registration status, so that under the supervision of a dentist who's already on the register, highly skilled international dentists can start treating patients sooner, rather than working as hygienists while they're waiting to join the register. And turning now to our plan's third pillar, which is prioritising prevention and giving children a healthy smile for life. This begins by supporting parents to give their children the best possible start. That is why family hubs up and down the country will offer parents-to-be expert advice on looking after their baby's teeth and gums. And as they grow up, we will support parents and nurseries to make brushing their teeth part of every child's routine before they start primary school. Because the evidence is clear. The earlier good habits are built, the longer they will last. And seeing a dentist regularly is also vitally important for children's health. Since the pandemic, too many have been unable to do this. And this is why this year we are taking care directly to children. We will deploy mobile dental teams to schools in areas with a shortage of NHS dentists. They will apply preventative fluoride varnish to more than 165,000 reception-age children's teeth, strengthening them early and preventing decay. And Mr. Speaker, our Smile for Life programme has already been endorsed by the College of General Dentistry. Mr. Speaker, 6 million people in England already benefit from water fluoridation. And to go further to protect children's teeth, we will consult on strengthening more of our country's water with fluoride. Again, the evidence is clear. In some of the most deprived parts of England, enhancing fluoride levels could reduce the number of teeth extracted because of decay by up to 56%. That is why, through the Health and Care Act, we've made it simpler to add fluoride to more of our water supply. And as a first step this year, we will launch a consultation to expand water fluoridation across the North East. An expansion that would give 1.6 million more people access to water that strengthens their teeth, preventing tooth decay and tackling inequality. Mr. Speaker, this is our government's plan to recover and reform dental care. Dental training places up 40%. 2.5 million more appointments, dental vans treating more patients, more dentists in remote areas, more dentists taking on NHS patients, better support for families and better care for children, patient access up, inequity coming down, making life simpler and treatment faster and fairer for patients and staff. Mr. Speaker, we've taken the difficult decisions and we have delivered now a long-term plan to make dental care faster, simpler and fairer for people across the country. We're going to get on with the job and put our plan into action. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State, Wes Streeting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I wholeheartedly associate my
myself and my party with the remarks of the Secretary of State and sending our best wishes to His Majesty the King, and having gone through a cancer diagnosis myself, particularly his family, for whom it's often more difficult than the person receiving the diagnosis. And in the generous spirit in which we've begun, can I thank the Health Secretary for accidentally emailing me her entire plan yesterday? It was above and beyond the courtesy we normally expect. And in that spirit, I look forward to receiving her party's election manifesto any day now. Of course, we'll have to write ours first to give them some inspiration. Mr. Speaker, after 14 years of Conservative government, NHS dentistry is in decay. 8 in 10 dentists are not taking on new patients. In the southwest of England, the figure is 99%. 1 in 10 people have been forced to attempt DIY dentistry, Dickensian conditions, because they can't see an NHS dentist and they can't afford to go private.
Order. Mr. Beck. No, I'm sorry, but you did a little bit earlier. I don't want any more hattling from you. I want everybody, quite rightly, to listen to the Secretary of State, except the same for the Shadow Secretary of State, West Street.
Oh, don't worry, Mr. Speaker. I'll come back to the PPS shortly. Tooth decay is the #1 reason for children aged 6 to 10 being admitted to hospital. And unbelievably, there have been reports of Ukrainian refugees booking dentist appointments back home and returning for treatment because it is easier to fly to a war-torn country than it is to see an NHS dentist in England. Well, Mr. Speaker, at least there's one government policy that's getting flights off the ground, because it's certainly not their Rwanda scheme failure. And, Mr. Speaker, let's look at the human consequences of this Conservative tragedy. Labour's candidate in Great Yarmouth, Keir Cousins, told me about Jeanette, a young woman in her 30s who has struggled with gum and mouth problems all her life. She used to be able to get treatment. Now she can't find an NHS dentist in all of Norfolk to take her. She can't afford to go private. It hurts to smile. It hurts to laugh. The pain is so great, Jeanette doesn't go out anymore. And just this week, Jeanette resorted to trying to remove her own tooth. This isn't right for anyone of any age, but Jeanette should be in the prime of her life. So will the Secretary of State apologise to Jeanette and the millions like her for what the Conservatives have done to NHS dentistry? After 14 years of neglect, cuts and incompetence, the government has today announced a policy. More appointments, recruiting dentists to the areas most in need, toothbrushing for children. It sounds awfully familiar, Mr. Speaker. By adopting much of Labour's rescue plan for dentistry, doesn't it just show that the Conservatives are out of ideas of their own and they are looking to Labour to fix the mess they have made? And next time Conservative ministers say Labour doesn't have a plan or Labour's plan isn't credible, don't believe a word of it. And of course, Mr. Speaker, there are some differences between our two parties' approaches. Labour is pledging an extra 700,000 extra urgent and emergency appointments, additional to the appointments announced today. Can the Health Secretary confirm that the government's plan doesn't provide any additional emergency support? Labour proposed supervised toothbrushing for early years. Conservative MPs accused it of being nanny state. Does the Health Secretary stand by that label, or does she now support children under 5 being supported to brush their teeth? And, Mr. Speaker, the key difference is this. We recognised our plan was a rescue plan and that to put NHS dentistry back on its feet, immediate reform of the dental contract is needed. Without this is a plan that is doomed to fail. And don't just take my word for it. The British Dental Association have said this plan won't stop the exodus of dentists from the NHS, it won't provide a dentist for every patient who needs one, and it won't put an end to this crisis. And coming to the miserable script of the PPS and the whips that's spreading it round the table, if it is really the case that Labour's contract is to blame, then why haven't they reformed it for 14 years and why aren't they reforming it now? Because, Mr. Speaker, in 2010 the Conservatives promised in its election
election manifesto to reform the dental contract. They're not just bringing back Lord Cameron, they're bringing back his broken promises. And, Mr Speaker, people have been desperately trying to get dental care for years, and there was nothing from the Conservative Party. But now we're in an election year, they're trying to kick the can down the road, scramble for a plan. They only discover their heart when they fear in their heart for their own political futures. And the consequences have been seen around the block in Bristol. Finally, Mr Speaker, the Secretary of State is promising reform after 2025, after the next general election. Who is she trying to kid? After 2025, the Conservatives will be gone. And if they're not, NHS dentistry will be. How many more chances do they expect? How many more broken promises? 2010, 2015, 2017, 2019. Mr Speaker, their time is up, and it's time for Labour to deliver the change this country needs.
Well, Mr Speaker, I tried to help him by giving him advance copy of